So we were talking last week about fasting, and I thought we'd talk a little bit about, I think, one of the wonderful things that we realize about fasting is on a day like today. Today is Palm Sunday, which is a feast of the church. And the church has various ways of indicating to us the presence of the festal. The presence of the festal. One is that we change colors, right? So we're in green. The altar servers are going to be in purple, but that's only because their golds are upstairs, and it becomes this whole rigmarole of pulling all the golds down and putting all the purples somewhere and then switching again by tonight. So sometimes we just fudge that. But technically, we could have changed the whole church to gold or green today, and the clergy and the servers in green for Palm Sunday. It's indicative of a feast that we serve the Divine Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom today, whereas we have been serving the Liturgy of St. Basil, so it's going to be a little bit quicker, shorter prayers. It's indicative of a feast that we have the festal antiphons at the beginning of the service, and those festal antiphons are also celebratory. So there's all these ways that the church communicates to us it's a feast. Enter into the feast. And one of those ways that's very instructive towards fasting is food. Whenever there's a feast, there's a component to the feast which is of food. Just as to the fast, there's a component of food, to the feast, there's a component of food. And if we've got this balance right, part of entering into the feast through all these liturgical things is also expressed entering into the feast through food. So what's the main food today that is festal? Anybody? Fish, right. But really, fish? Fish? How is fish festal? I mean, fish is what we eat on a fast day. Think about this now, because this is crucial for us to understanding our relationship to fasting. If fish is what we eat on a fast day, then how can the church say that fish is a feast day? Think about that for a second, all right? And of course, that reveals to us what we know, what I've mentioned, but I've also clarified. If you look on the St. Tikhon's calendar, or you look on any extensive Orthodox calendar, look throughout Great Lent, and there's only 2 fish days the whole time, right? Annunciation and Palm Sunday. The rest of the days are no fish. Saturdays and Sundays are wine and oil, but it doesn't say fish. You'll never see a feast day saying, hooray, we're eating shrimp today, right? We don't use shrimp or shellfish as indicative of entering into the joy of the feast. Don't see it, but you do see fish. So what do we do with that? And this is where I think, because I also mentioned from the Emvon that in our tradition, most of us were raised thinking, well, no, fish is what you eat on a fast day. And therefore, that calendar doesn't make sense. Somebody's confused here, right? Somebody's wrong here. So how do we wrestle with that? And how do we take that to ourselves? And here's the problem. Here's the challenge. If I don't wrestle with that, I get to this day, and the church is communicating all these festal elements to me, and then I go to eat, and I'm like, meh, and I'm not entering into the joy of the feast. I'm not having a blessed feast. Why? Because I just had fish 8 days in a row. You know, I'm sick of fish. This is not something special. But of course, if you haven't had fish much during Great Lent, you get to Annunciation, you get to Palm Sunday, and you're like, ooh, it's a fish day. We're going to get a nice piece of salmon. It's going to be a special thing. And suddenly it takes on something different. If I don't have it during the fast days, then it becomes festal on the festal days. And this is where I think it's really crucial for us to understand the importance of failure in the fast. Failure in the fast. On a certain level, we understand that culturally speaking, amongst Orthodoxy in this region, and really probably overseas as well, fish is sort of just, we don't make a big deal about fish when it comes to the fast. But let's say that I decide, well, the church knows what it's talking about. If the church wants to give me fish on a feast day, that means that I probably shouldn't be eating fish on a fast day unless it says that it's a fish day. And it won't say it's a fish day unless there's some festal element that I'm entering into. And look, at any fast day throughout the year, that has a fish day on it, it's almost always a festal element. During some fasts, lesser feasts have fish more often. During Great Lent, only 2 feasts get the fish. All right, so here's the deal. If I do eat fish during the Great Fast as a matter of course, I just say, well, this is one of the things we eat. But I say in the back of my mind, I'm eating fish, but I realize it's because, maybe I wasn't as prepared for Great Lent this year. I know I shouldn't be eating fish. I know the church knows what it's talking about. But, I really want a fried fish sandwich right now, and I'm just craving it, and I'm going to, North Park Lounge, and I'm getting it, but I know underneath I probably shouldn't be doing that. I wish I was strong enough not to do that. The fast becomes a mirror for my spiritual life. And I can't use the fast as a mirror for my spiritual life if I don't let failure become part of the fast. If I don't say, I know what I should be doing today, but I'm really just hungry and I'm really frustrated and I need this little bit of consolation. But I acknowledge that I could have been spiritually stronger. I could have been physically stronger not to have eaten the fish. And so I struggle with this a little bit. But here's the miraculous thing. If I do that, even if I've eaten fish 12 times throughout Great Lent, knowing that I probably shouldn't have been eating it, if I know that I shouldn't have been eating it, then when I get to Palm Sunday and I eat fish, it's different. It's totally different. Because now eating fish is a way that the church has given us to enter into the joy of the Lord. And it acknowledges that the reality is food matters. Food is comforting. Food is enjoyable. Food is something that we love, that we almost cling to. But I can't really appreciate that unless I'm able to stop eating at certain times. If you eat a T-bone steak every single day for 60 days, and then someone says to you, guess what's for dinner tonight? Special treat, a T-bone steak. You're going to be like, ugh, That festal thing, the eating of the meat, has become so normal to you that there's no pleasure in it. It's almost like, oh, I'll eat it. Yeah, I eat it all the time. But if I fast from it and then have a T-bone steak, oh my goodness, it becomes this really special treat. When I was a kid, we'd go backpacking, and we would leave Friday after school. We'd drive up to like the Allegheny National Forest or wherever, and we'd backpack Saturday, and we'd come out Sunday. And Sunday, on the way home, we'd usually stop to eat, because we'd usually backpack out maybe half the day. And so you always stopped at some fast food place, and we were all like, oh, I need a hamburger so badly, We'd been deprived of hamburgers for exactly 1.5 days, right? But we acted like we were dying because we were eating freeze-dried backpacking food, and oh, I need a hamburger. But you ate that hamburger, and it really was like, oh, that's amazing, So there's this relationship of food as expressive of fast. If I fail throughout the Great Lent fast and I eat fish all the time, but I know in my mind, I don't justify it. I don't say, oh, well, that's just the way it's supposed to be. I don't say one thing is right and the church calendar is wrong. Or that article that I showed you, or we talked about at the front of the Lenten Triodian, explaining the parameters of the fast. Oh, they're wrong. They don't get it. They don't understand what it's like to live in a modern society. They don't understand the temptations that we face. I'm right and they're wrong. If I do that, then I get to Palm Sunday and it's like, fish, whatevs, I've had fish. I'm done with fish. Shrimp, oh my gosh, keep shrimp away from me at this point of the fast. I don't want it. I've had it too much. You shouldn't eat too much shellfish anyway, It's like, please, I don't want shrimp until after Pentecost. But if I've struggled a little bit, then I'm still, even if I failed, that failure is indicative of my spiritual state. And it's enough for me to be able to enter into the feast, the joy of the feast, which is to have a beautiful fish dish today. So fasting is never so legalistic that there's these rules and then there's my rules and then I'm right and you're wrong, or you're right and I'm wrong, or I just do this. It's this very much this push and pull, this interrelationship between how fasting prepares us to enter into the joy of the Lord, which is the joy of the feast, which is the celebration of the feast. If I don't fast, I won't be able to do that as acutely. The more I fast, the more unbelievable entering into the feast becomes. See? And we know that with Pascha. We know that with Pascha. Pascha, if I have ignored the fast all the way through Lent and I get to Pascha and it's like, yeah, this is pretty good. Yeah, that's fine. But if I've really kept the fast and gone to the services and interconnected all these things together and I get to Pascha, it's an explosion of joy and light and brightness. So there's an entrance. If I don't enter into the fast, it's harder, if not impossible, to enter into the feast. And I become dulled. And unfortunately, that is part of the culture that we live in. Any culture of conspicuous consumption, whether it's consumer goods or electronics, or especially food, it dulls us to the pleasures of food. It dulls us to the pleasures of food. It dulls us to the reality that food is wonderful. And tasty food is even more wonderful. And we should enjoy it, but we enjoy it more when we deprive ourselves of it. And so that's all part of entering into the feast. Any questions about that? It's just important. Fail. When it comes to the fast, please fail. If you're not failing, you're not doing it right. If you're not failing, you're not doing it right. Because if you fail, you begin to realize your own spiritual strength or lack thereof, and you begin to then appreciate the feast all that much more. Oh, I ate fish last week, and it was a moment of weakness, but today's a fish day, and I get to enjoy it. And it's different. It's just different. I think this is the same thing even with things like, little things like dairy. You know, there's a difference eating dairy throughout the rest of the year on just regular fast days, sort of non-fast days. There's a difference. If you're doing this right, you will feel the difference between, oh, I had some dairy on Wednesday, and oh, I ate dairy on Thursday. Because Thursday's not a fast day, and Wednesday is a fast day, you see. So I might have failed on Wednesday, but I know I failed. I know I had a moment of weakness. I know I just wanted to indulge myself. I had to have Frosted Flakes with whole milk. I needed it. But Frosted Flakes with whole milk on Thursday morning, totally different realm now. Now it's, oh, I'm not fasting. It's just different. It's just different. I was just going to say something that, it just flew out of my head. It'll come back to me. Anyway, so that's one thing. Wait, no, there was something. What was that? Failure. It'll come to me. I'll interrupt the next part of my talk if it comes back to me. Let me do this. Let me read a funny little story from Archbishop Alexander, who some of you may know he was a monk on Mount Athos. But this I think, I don't know if this was when he had already been a monk or he had just gotten there. This is in 1977 at Simona Petra Monastery. And this is Archbishop Alexander writing this. It was pre-dawn on a Sunday morning in January, and the snow lay 6 inches deep on the ledges outside the refectory windows. I knew this last detail because the windows were wide open. The abbot did not like the smell of cooking fish, and the fathers on duty had decided to air out the room some 30 minutes before the meal was due to be eaten. The air was certainly fresh and only a few degrees above freezing. As the young monks were anxious not to miss receiving Holy Communion, they had opened the windows at the same time as they were setting out the portions. So just as a sort of clarification, communion would have been probably at like 5 or 4 a.m., okay? So they've been praying all night. This is going to be breakfast after they had received communion, but that happens right in the middle of the night. So in order to not miss communion, they had done their duty in the refectory so that they could get back over to the church to receive the Holy Mysteries. When I thus arrived at my place at the guest table and glanced down, shivering at my meal, my gaze was challenged by the eye of an even colder fish, glaring up at me from beneath a pool of deep green gelid olive oil. If you've ever seen olive oil, what happens to it when it's cold? It gels up like any oil. And in our mission parish in Texas, we didn't have heat. We normally didn't need it very often. So we had some space heaters for those few days that we needed it. But if it got really cold, you'd come to light the oil lamps, and the olive oil had turned into gel. All right? So the fish is cold. The fish has been prepared with the head on, so the cold eye of the fish is looking up at Archbishop Alexander. We stared at each other for a time, locked in combat, the fish issuing its challenge, bet you can't, while hunger struggled with revulsion in me. It was a short war, and the fish won. It lay unmarked while I blunted my appetite with some greens and cheese. The monks, on the other hand, suffered no such inhibitions. So he doesn't like fish in the first place. So this was just a step too far, and he just couldn't eat it. But this was a feast day, he points out. This was a feast day, which is why they were having fish and cheese, because the church was telegraphing, it's a feast day. How do we do that? We eat special foods. So he failed. But, and then here's another sort of extension of it. The meal just described was a festal one. On other fasting days, the fare was considerably poorer. And I'll just point out as an addition, Alexander, my son, when he went to a Catholic high school, and your junior year, you were required to do a week-long service trip. And he convinced them to let him go to the Greek monastery in Candalia, Texas, which is about an hour north of San Antonio. Frank and Carol were just there recently. Beautiful, beautiful monastery. So he was going to go there and live there for the week and just do whatever they needed him to do, and that was going to be a service project. But it was during Great Lent, and he would go to breakfast, and they would put a boiled beet down in front of him. A boiled beet, and a big one. It was like that big. It was, and believe me, he never touched it. He ate saltines and peanut butter the whole week, and the monks told me they didn't think he was going to make it. But anyway, on other fasting days, the fare is considerably poorer. This writer, Archbishop Alexander, can recall seeing a group of German visitors staring gloomily at bowls of cold lentil soup. The recipe: pulse and water, boil and serve, only to receive a further shock from the guest master. Noting their dismay, the worthy father seemed momentarily troubled. Not for long. His expression brightened directly, and he hurried out of the room, only to return moments later beaming and carrying a large blue plastic pitcher of the sort that one waters plants with. Shame on me, he chuckled in Greek, to have forgotten that you're traveling and entitled to a dispensation for oil. So saying, and certain that he was bestowing ineffable delights on his charges, he proceeded to pour at least half a cup of thick, cold olive oil into each of their bowls. Fortunately, he seemed to have mistaken the dumb horror in their eyes for startled pleasure, and had left the room again before they could give more forceful expression to their dismay. I've noticed I have a cookbook of really authentic Greek cooking, and it's almost astonishing how much olive oil they use in almost every recipe. You know, most American recipes that use olive oil, they're like, now put 2 tablespoons of olive oil and saute your onions. They're like, put a half a cup of olive oil into the pan and add your onions. I mean, they really, really go big with the olive oil in a way that's culturally quite foreign to us. One of the things that the Archbishop then shares, and those are just funny stories there, but he points out that actually, as horrific as it can be to go to a monastery on a fast day, in terms of food, he mentions that it's not actually that much different than what most sort of working class or poorer Greeks ate for much of history. Their diet was very simple. And in fact, they had an immense capacity to fast. And he tells a story of the average sort of Greek muleteer can have a Greek coffee, a piece of bread, and maybe some halva in the morning, and then he can go all day and work hard labor and not eat again until the evening. And that this is just sort of culturally what people can do there, but they typically eat food where the basis of their food is always going to be some kind of grains with greens and other vegetables. And then if it's a mild feast day, some olive oil on there. And if it's a feast day, you might add fish. And if it's a big feast day, you might add a little piece of meat. But meat only on high feast days. Typically it was just too expensive, and it wasn't as common throughout at various times of history. So their primary diet was always going to be plant-based in the first place, and meat was something you added for feast days. So on a fast day, all you're really doing to your diet is subtracting something that was only there rarely in the first place. That's totally different than our experience of fasting, isn't it? Our experience of fasting, our problem is that a normal meal for us is a plate of meat with a little bit of vegetable and a little bit of starch on the side, And that's how we think of eating. Just as culturally, that's how we eat. And you take meat away, you got nothing, You don't have a meal there. And that's not true in traditional Mediterranean and Middle Eastern cooking. You take the meat away, you still have an incredible abundance of food in front of you that's all plant-based. Very different relationship. And I've tried and often failed to sort of change my relationship with food and reflect this more biblical approach to food, this more sort of Mediterranean, Middle Eastern approach to food, which recognize this. I mean, it's not that uncommon even in some of the Slavic lands where poor people, they ate bread and kasha and, and simple things. They ate simple things. We celebrate pierogies, but that's peasant food, It really is. Pierogies and halushki and all that kind of stuff, that's really peasant food. It's culturally meaningful to us, and it evokes emotions in us. But it's not what you eat at a great feast, So even in Slavic lands and colder climes, they tended to eat very simply, and meat was a special thing. So I think one of the challenges of the fast for us as Americans, as tempted as we are to justify why we shouldn't have to fast, ironically, fasting should be easier in our culture of food than it has been for most people in history, because go to any grocery store and you have this amazing abundance of vegan options and vegetables grown. We don't have seasonable fruits and seasonal vegetables. We get all fruits and all vegetables all year long, all the time, And maybe the peaches, aren't as juicy as they're going to be in August from Sorgels or Kalins or wherever you get your peaches. But they're there. They're for sale. Yeah. Yeah, I think, so the question is, what if you're a vegan all year round? How do you approach the fast? Well, technically speaking, you're already fasting. So, good job. Like the church would not officially impose something additional on a vegan that it wouldn't impose on other people. In other words, and that's the beauty of the commonality of the fast. The fast is not, what are you giving up for Lent? Right? Oh, I know what it was. I know what I was going to think. Let me come back to this in 1 minute. What's during Great Lent? This is okay. I know I'm probably going to get in trouble here, but during Great Lent, we have this thing in Pittsburgh, and we all know it. It's the wonderful Friday fish fry, right? The Friday fish fry. And, of course, we know that is predominantly a Roman Catholic practice. And why is it a Roman Catholic practice? That's important to ask. It's a Roman Catholic practice because Friday is the one day during Great Lent that you fast, and fasting means eating fish, okay? And eating fish fried fish is I like fish, so fried fish isn't much of a fast to me personally, because I put the hot sauce on there and whatever. But so it's a fast day. That means you eat fish, and that's very much common here. But we have to back up a minute and realize, not a minute, but a couple centuries, and realize, first of all, that Christians in the West, Roman Catholics, used to fast exactly the way that we do up until about the 1400s. Okay? It wasn't until, and then in this period between the 1400s and then through the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation and the Council of Trent, the Roman Catholic Church began changing some of its practices in a sense as a response to the Protestant practices. Because the Protestants, one of the first things they did was they tossed fasting out the window. Right? So they would have been, if you were an adult and the Reformation was unfolding in the midst of things, you would have been raised to fast and then decided, this is wrong, and I'm not going to do it anymore, and this is a revolution, and I'm going to feast. And Martin Luther is explicit about this. Martin Luther was a monk. He engaged in all kinds of ascetic practices. He fasted much the way that we would have fasted, but once he broke away from the church, it was all feast all the time. It was indulge because God has saved you by grace. And all of these efforts that you're making to merit your own righteousness are fruitless, and therefore you can get rid of them. So you get through this practice where the Protestants are throwing away fasting, almost one of the first things that they do. The Roman Catholics start modifying their fasting from the common fast that all Christians have, which is what we do now today, to the point where today, where the only fast day for a Roman Catholic practitioner during the Great Fast is Friday, and that means that you eat fish. So here's where I might get in trouble, but you know, folks, I have to say there's one day especially that you should not eat fish during Great Lent, and that's Friday. Precisely when culturally everyone's saying, here's fish, let me make it easy for you. Why? Because Friday is a strict fast day. It is not a feast day. Fish is a feast element when you're in a fasting season. It's not so much a feast element when you're not in a fasting season, but it is when you are in a fasting season, right? Fish doesn't mean time to fast. Fish means enter into the joy of the Lord. It's a feast. So the one day you should definitely not eat fish, and I know that in Pittsburgh, is on Friday when all the fish days are going on. It's a totally different logic. It's a totally different way of approaching these things, you see. And one of the things we have to ask ourselves, if we say, well, we think the church needs to modernize, we think the church needs to get with it, and people just don't do this kind of thing. And look, the Roman Catholics got rid of this like 5 centuries ago. Why are we still fasting this way? And we can ask ourselves, well, how far do you want to go on that? How far do we want to take that? Do we just want to get rid of all fasting and only fast on Fridays and then make them fish days on top of that? I mean, imagine as an Orthodox Christian how different that would be for you if we got to Lent and we said, okay, folks, the only fast days are Friday and you can eat fish as much as your heart's content. You can gorge yourself at the local parish hall where they got the fryers going and they're ready for you. And you know, fries on the side, chips, if you will, if you're British. That carries over into so many things. As Orthodox Christians, we do have these traditions that reach back all the way to the beginning, and they used to be common to all Christians. Everyone else moved, and we've kept these traditions. So that's another reason why we have to be careful not to justify ourselves and not to say the church is wrong and I'm right when it comes to the meaning of the fast for me. And again, that gets to failure. Okay, that was the thing about Friday fish fries. That's the thing that was stuck in my head. So if you're already a vegan, you're already keeping the fast, so there isn't going to be much of a distinction. But if you have found the strength to do that, you receive the benefit of the fast, even if that means, you know, on a feast day, your festal element might just be adding olive oil to a dish, you know. So you might be an oil-free vegan on a fast day, but then go to olive oil on a feast day. And that might be as far as a vegan goes, as far as feasting. Or they might make a more elaborate vegan meal or that sort of thing. But the church is careful not to sort of make up rules for folks. Another example of this is Elder Joseph, St. Joseph the Hesychast of Mount Athos, modern-day saint, and his what's called co-struggler, Elder Arsenios. The two of them lived together in a cave and prayed for decades on Mount Athos. They were hermits, basically, and they were hesychasts. They prayed the prayer of stillness, the prayer of the heart, the Jesus prayer. And for years, the two of them had decided that they would actually fast strictly every day, irregardless of anything else, which meant that they had no dairy ever, and they didn't even have oil. So they just ate like boiled vegetables and boiled grains, and that's all they ate all the time, every single day, just the two of them. They were strong, okay, and they were pretty, I think you could probably say fanatical, okay? But then what happened was, as they progressed, and especially as Elder Joseph really became a God-bearing elder, the Lord sent disciples to them, other men who wanted to join their group and learn to pray as they did. And what they discovered was this new lot could not fast that way. They couldn't fast that way. They would get sick. They just physically weren't as strong and couldn't do it. And so Elder Joseph and Elder Arsenios changed, interestingly. They said, well, okay, from now on, obedience to the church. If the calendar says for monks, this is a day we eat fish, wine, and oil, and eggs and dairy products, then our monks can eat all those things, and we will too. So they changed because they had to adapt to the strength of their followers, and they adapted in the direction of love, but also in the direction of obedience to the church. They realized, okay, we've been doing this as sort of extreme desert ascetics, and even the church doesn't tell anyone, you have to do that. We were doing that by choice, but now out of love, we will partake of all things with joy for the sake of our monks, for those who couldn't do that. I think that's a beautiful element too, and it's maybe helpful for a vegan to sort of wrestle with how do I navigate these things. Any other questions? Yes, Nick. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. So the question, for the benefit of our online viewers, what about wine and oil, and how do we, during Great Lent, and how does that work? So wine and oil, so Saturdays and Sundays are always feast days. They might not, and a Sunday especially is always the Feast of the Resurrection. So throughout Great Lent, if you look on your calendar, every Saturday and Sunday is a wine and oil day. And that specifically means alcohol stronger than beer. And this is a little bit of a debate within the sort of larger Orthodox world. Some would say, look, the beer was invented as a Lenten drink. In other words, its alcohol content is much lower than wine. So when you're fasting from wine, what do you drink? Beer. So in a lot of places, and I've seen a lot of clergy and even sort of official documents, wine is defined as any alcohol stronger than beer, meaning you can drink beer as much as you want. Just, please be careful. Alcohol stronger than beer, and then oil specifically means olive oil. And you get into this, some people say, well, I think if it says oil and I use avocado oil, it's not that much of a difference, and so I don't think we should have avocado oil. Well, the church begs to differ. The church does not care if you use avocado oil from its perspective, from her perspective. The church does not impose different levels of strictness. If you as an individual wish to say, I wish to fast from oil completely, including all cooking oils, that's fine, you can do that. It's a free country, right? But the church does not require you to fast from avocado oil or vegetable oil or canola oil or whatever other oil you choose to use. Some would say, and this is in that article in the beginning of the Lenten Triodion, that an oil day, one of the meanings of an oil day is because you can have oil on that day, it means you can cook. It means it's not dry eating, right? Dry eating, the Greek word is xerophagy, means that you only eat raw vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, maybe bread that has been left over from the day before, or that sort of thing. But you don't spend your day cooking on a non-oil day in the strictest sense. It doesn't put that on the calendar. It doesn't say no cooking day. It just says oil. So again, that's not something that it imposes on us. But some people engage in dry eating, and I think I mentioned, Elder Haralambos, who was a disciple of Elder Joseph, the one who changed his fasting rules. would, on a fast day, only engage in xerophagi, dry eating. So Saturday and Sunday, but also any day where a saint's day falls, where we might sing the doxology for them. That's usually an indicator of why wine and oil is on that day. So it has to do, like if I'm looking at a calendar and I'm wondering what is the random pattern that seems to be at work here, it's a festal pattern within a fast period. And the festal means a saint of significant importance is on that day. So any of our North American saints, for example, any North American saint that falls on a weekday during Great Lent, we're going to see wine and oil. It's because of that saint. It's because we're entering into the joy of having a saint. Now, how much joy does olive oil and alcohol give us? Again, it depends on if you've been fasting from those things in the first place. If you haven't been, probably not much. But if you've been failing, and again, and then we need to stop and start the hours, but if you've been trying to fast from them, even if you've been failing, as long as you acknowledge the failure, then you can enter into the joy of the feast as well. So that's what's important there. Does that answer your question? Yeah. And when it comes, I will say this too, olive oil is probably one of the most dynamic elements on the fasting calendar. When we ask the question, why do we fast from olive oil? There's probably about 20 answers to that question, and they're all right. They seem unrelated, and they're all right. Olive oil meant so much more to the ancient world than it means to us. To us, it's just an option on the grocery store shelf. But to the ancient world, olive oil was life. It was the mercy of God. It was the anointing of the Holy Spirit. It was the joy of fat in your diet and all these different things. So very dynamic thing. Anyway, forgive me, we have to stop. Obviously, we won't be meeting next week. If you come at this time next Sunday, I won't be here. And we won't meet St. Thomas Sunday either because there's also no church school. But we'll try to meet a couple more times in May.